Hello and welcome to another episode of the AAIM High Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Anne Myong, a Fortune 1 and private company operating executive, public company board member, and startup advisor. Ms. Myong's career spans leadership roles at Walmart, Aura, and Agilent Technologies, where she's transformed global operations across US, China, and Brazil. She's led huge e-commerce growth, driven operational turnarounds, and advised founders as an investor through Sesame Hill Advisors. Thank you for being on the AAIM High Podcast today. Can't wait to talk to you.
Thanks, Ben. Happy to be here.
All right, to start off, we'll first talk about your childhood and upbringing. Because this podcast is centered around being an Asian American leader in business, it is important to first understand each guest's childhood and upbringing as an Asian American, because ideas instilled within you from your parents and environment may have helped shape how you, or may have helped you become successful in where you are today. So for the first question, could you maybe explain your childhood situation growing up? Where did you grow up? Did you have any siblings? And what were family dynamics like?
Sure. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. I was born in Washington, but grew up in the Virginia area, the youngest of three kids. I have two older brothers. My parents came from Korea. My father's from North Korea. My mom is from South Korea, from Seoul. Mm-hmm. And they both came over separately to study after the Korean War. And so they were really part of the first wave. I was trying to do some research to see, what kind of cohort they were part of during that first wave. I think it's fair to say that they were in the very first, few thousand people, in the DC area. My father always joked that, that he and my mom connected because there weren't more than 50 Koreans in the DC area, and so there wasn't much choice. But my dad was a really funny guy. But they both came to study and were really trailblazers in that respect. My mom, came from South Korea, as I mentioned, and the oldest child. My dad was almost the youngest of his family. And I think coming to the United States after that period was really to restart, life and come to a country where there was really infinite opportunity to study and really do, what you were wanting to do, as opposed to what you were sort of, pre-diagnosed or set for in your life, depending on your station in life and your economic status. So I think that's really one of those values that that we carried forward in our family about being resourceful, being entrepreneurial, being scrappy, and I think that's also blended with the Asian culture, which sometimes didn't always coalesce, but that's part of the story.
Yeah. And how did your parents' experiences from immigrating to the U.S. influence your perspective on work and success in the future?
Well, for me, it was really you just have to make your own success is, how I interpreted their way of being. My father was a dentist. He started his own practice coming out of dental school at Georgetown. My mom was a little bit older. She put him through dental school, and so they built that business together. And I just remember as a little kid, because the practice was in our home, hanging out a lot in the practice and watching him greet patients and know a lot about families and being a very personal dentist, not just someone who fixed their teeth, but someone who really cared about them, knew all about their families. And he was actually somebody that his patients really enjoyed seeing, which was not typical for a dentist. Most people don't like going to the dentist.
Yeah, but they get nervous and intimidated maybe.
Yeah, and he did a great job of calming people down because, they know that he really cared about them, and he was going to take care of them and do the best for them. So that was a really big learning for me, and just how to run a small business, which is ironic because I took a different path for a while, but we'll talk about that too.
Yeah, and like kind of adding on to like you mentioned how your parents like instilled that like kind of entrepreneurial or like kind of scrappy mindset when you were growing up. Did you want to maybe go into entrepreneurship when you were older, or did you not really think about it when you were going into like high school or maybe college?
I always thought about it, and I'm always thinking about it, but it took different forms. And, even though I took a little bit more of a traditional corporate path within the corporate context, and the choices that I made, they were always a little bit more on the fringe, which I'll explain, which is probably not so obvious from the resume or the LinkedIn. But, I always wanted to be in situations where I could help drive change and help change strategy for the better, or look at expansion or disruption from within the enterprise. Which in some ways, I think it's one thing to be the disruptor and to be the company that's trying to take on the David to the Goliath, but I think it's another challenge to be on the inside and trying to change and accelerate and disrupt a company that has already been arguably very, very successful. And that's actually really hard to do because the motivation and the incentives are not necessarily there to change when you've been extremely successful doing one thing, for your career, for the company. So,
yeah, and we'll definitely dive deeper into that later. But coming back to like your childhood, did you feel any pressure to ever conform to certain expectations, either from your family or outside the home, like at school or in the broader community? And how did you handle that?
Well, of course, as an Asian, there was always an emphasis on education and learning and getting good grades. I had like many of us musical training. And,
I had that too.
And there was actually a piano waiting for me before I was born. So there's sort of a joke that, there's a picture of me sitting on the piano bench. Probably I could barely hold my own head up, but my hands were on the piano keys. And so that was a predestined, fate. But I learned a lot from musical training for sure. But in terms of pressure, I think my parents just wanted me to do what really excited me and what I was curious about. And so there wasn't a lot of pressure to follow in my father's footsteps. I pretty much knew early on that I wanted to be in business. And I probably sold a lot of things. How come?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it was just maybe fascination with, the consumer and just seeing how businesses ran. And maybe that was part of just, watching a small business from the inside out grow. As you and I talked about, it's glamorous, but it's also very, very gritty, and it's difficult. And you are responsible not only for your customers or your patients, but for your employees. And there are a lot of interesting dynamics and hiring, and, sometimes those decisions don't turn out very well, and you have to deal with that. So, I think watching my dad, even though he was a dentist, he was a small business owner. And my mom was also very resourceful. So she invested a lot of, his profits into other ventures, and she was a bit of a risk taker on her own, but I think that's really where I picked it up.
Yeah. And as we move on to the second part of the podcast talking about education and early career. What was your undergrad experience like, and did you know what you wanted to do as a career during college?
Well, I did major in business. I went to a state university in Virginia, and I knew I wanted to be in business, but that was the time when computers and technology were really taking off. And, I thought that would be a really interesting field to jump into. And, I again thought, why not ride the wave and see what that's all about? I ended up joining a very small boutique firm out of college, and I was doing systems integration, and I did some coding, but I really loved the user requirements, the business requirements, and it was really kind of the precursor to product development or product management, because I was curious about how our clients were going to use these systems for their business processes and how to make their businesses perform better, and also how to make the customer experience better. And so that was what I migrated towards. But I joined this very small firm, and before I was there, three to 6 months, we ended up being acquired by McKinsey and Company, and that was pretty unexpected, and but very, very exciting, because I definitely wanted to go to business school at some point. But what I learned from that experience was just how important culture is when it comes to merging two organizations. And during that time, they were quite different, and so there were some challenges when it came to just blending and getting the value out of that acquisition.
Mm-hmm. And can you kind of talk about like what you did, or like your role at McKinsey after that first firm was like acquired, and like what you did on like a day-to-day basis?
Well, I had a couple of clients where I was either working on, I did all IT integration and strategy. So, I did some work with a retailer, home center retailer, where we were completely replacing their point of sale systems. And so, again, that was a lot about their processes and, how to implement something that would help them serve customers better. I also worked on the integration of the two firms. And so helping McKinsey understand the talent base that we had and how to leverage that talent in engagements with their existing clients. So it was sort of an inside-outside experience that I had before going to business school, but I really jumped on any opportunity to help with the integration, but learn as much as I could about the art of consulting and strategy, and so there was a lot of travel and a lot of hard work, but it was a really great experience.
Mm-hmm. So this gave you like a lot of like foundational skills, or like basic stuff you like first learned out of undergrad, basically?
Yeah, one of the key lessons for me was, if you see an opportunity and you think you can address it or add value, raise your hand. And so on the integration of the two firms, because I was working on an internal system for our own company, for our own firm, that was a system that we needed to port over. And so I took that talent management system to New York and, helped McKinsey understand what they had just acquired. And, it wasn't something that was, I guess, thought of by a partner. It was something that I thought, this is what we've been working on, and maybe this will help. Make sure that our people are understood and deployed, into engagements that will help both firms and the clients.
Mm-hmm. And then did you end up going to business school like right after you were working at McKinsey? Is that kind of how your timeline worked?
Yeah, because of the acquisition, I took a little bit more time. So I went to business school after 3 years of work experience. And that was the perfect amount of time for me to really feel like I had learned everything that I could prior to business school. And so, I went off to Boston to attend HBS, Harvard Business School, back in the early 90s.
Yeah. And what was the next step after you went to business school? What was your next job, and how did you get it after that?
Well, admittedly, I went to Procter and Gamble to try brand management, brand marketing over the summer. But I did go back to McKinsey for a couple more years. I basically needed to pay off my debt, to be very honest. And after that, I, had always wanted to go out to California from the East Coast. There was so much going on in technology and the internet and so much entrepreneurship that, I thought that would be a really great place for me to really start a technology career. And so I did that after 2 more years at McKinsey. And, and one of the things that I had studied in business school was HP's culture, the HP way. And after a lot of looking and a lot of, nights on the couch of a friend's apartment, I ended up joining the HP team in the corporate development area, which is basically M&A. I did not want to do strategy anymore because I felt like I had done it enough. And that would have been a very easy job to get into a lot of companies. But I was curious about the culture and how now HP was able to maintain that culture with all of these, startups kind of nipping at their ankles, and also learn something new, which is a theme throughout my life and career. Learn how to be a strategic acquirer of businesses. I didn't want to do banking per se, but I was very interested in inorganic growth as a strategy. So that move afforded me that opportunity.
Yeah. And then can you maybe explain your journey from then on to Agilent Technologies, and how did that opportunity come about?
Yeah, so after doing a couple years at HP, and then I did a startup in 99, 2000 that was acquired. I went back to Agilent after Agilent split and had spun out of HP. And I ended up meeting our CFO, and he was a very unusual CFO, in at least my mind, and a real strategic thinker and economist. And he really kind of sparked the idea of becoming a CFO, which I really hadn't thought of before. And so, working directly with him on corporate venture capital investments, and then later as kind of his transformation leader and chief of staff, I then got the opportunity to go to China to become a CFO for the first time. So I was there for quite a while, but the different roles that I had at Agilent Technologies during that time were really exciting and really helped me grow as a professional.
And you were there for 10 years, and like you mentioned, you had many different roles. So can you maybe explain how your role evolved over time and how your responsibilities kind of grew or changed?
Yeah. Well, when I went back to Agilent after the .com bust, I went in as an individual contributor. And as I alluded to, we were doing venture capital investing. And so I did wireless investing for the company. But I was doing that really on my own with a number of different technical teams. And then I was transitioned into a leadership role and a managerial role, which was, first time for me. And I learned a lot from that experience because it wasn't about what I could do. It was what our team could accomplish. And, I think being, a real driver and achiever, kind of stepping back and leading from behind was a big learning for me. And that helped me, as I said, get to know our CFO very deeply, and then get this opportunity to go, to a new country, obviously being Korean, although a lot of people thought I was Chinese when I was in China. But of course, growing up, born in the United States, I had to learn a lot about operating in a culture that was in many ways new, but not new, being, firstborn of, two immigrants from Korea. But, I was able to go from individual contributor to manager leader to, chief financial officer, in our number two country. And one that was, pretty challenging as a multinational company to operate in. And so it was a big responsibility for me to take on at that time.
Mm-hmm. And as that CFO of the China group, what were you responsible for or doing on a week to week?
Every week was so different, which is actually what I loved about the job. I would be working on, very nitty gritty compliance issues as the CFO, China GAAP reporting. It was all statutory, GAAP reporting. Working with the team, building out the team, coaching the team. And that just wasn't my team, but it was really the entire China team, because one of the mandates I had was to help grow the business and do it in a way that was, compliant, with being a multinational US-based company, but also within the culture of Agilent's corporate culture. And so trying to understand the individuals, the Chinese culture, trying to blend that with our corporate culture and navigate, the growth path. We were in a lot of joint ventures with either government entities or local Chinese companies. And we wanted to transition to a fully, wholly owned business by Agilent. So that was also a bit tricky, working with government entities and all of that. So there was no typical week, and there was a lot of opacity, meaning there were a lot of things that I couldn't see through, and in business and in government, and that just required a lot of strategy and listening and navigation and scenario planning. And it was very hard, but extremely rewarding work.
Yeah. And did you like working in China more than the US, or and how was that kind of transition, or working in China for you?
Well, the first 6 months was really hard. I felt like I didn't know what I was doing, and I was sort of regretful. I'm like, what did I do? But I think one of the things that really helped was just talking to everybody, at all levels, and trying to understand the business, understanding the cultural nuances. I also started to learn Chinese very, very aggressively, because a lot of expats, it's not an easy language to learn, but a lot of expats, in any country, will rely on English because that's the language of business around the world. But I really felt it was important for me to try to learn the language as much as I could. And what it actually gave to me, something I didn't expect, was an understanding of culture, of Chinese culture, why certain words are used versus others. The language can be very direct or very indirect, and you need to understand why people are saying things the way they are in certain contexts. And so they gave me that understanding, and helping me understand when my colleagues would speak to me in English, they were actually speaking in a very Chinese way, if that makes sense. And so learning Chinese helped me kind of reverse engineer the communication. I know that maybe sound a little bit odd, but it did help me kind of diagnose and understand what was going on. And as a chief financial officer, you do have to, a lot of it is around managing risk, but it is also about helping the business move forward and grow from your seat. And that really helped me quite a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then like moving on, like how did the opportunity to join Walmart as Senior Vice President, Chief Financial and Administrative Officer at Walmart China Retail come about? And did you get it from being in China and it was like an easy transition, or like how did that work?
I was there, as we just discussed, I was in Beijing for 5 years, and then I got the call from a recruiter, and I thought, Walmart, why are you calling me? I'm in tech, right?
Yeah.
And so actually, after a lot of conversations, we decided that it was a good thing to continue and stay in China. And my daughters were quite young, and actually we had adopted our girls from China. So they're twin girls, and they were thriving, in their culture, learning their language. And so we thought, why not? And rather than come back to California and to the Valley just yet, we moved from Beijing to Shenzhen. I started in a new role in a very different industry, going from technology, high tech to mass retail in China. And that was a big move, but we decided to go for it and restart the clock. So we were there for 8 years between Agilent and Walmart.
Yeah. And like, what were some of the biggest difficulties making that switch from like tech to retail at this time?
Well, looking back, I don't know if I would recommend it for everyone, but joining a new company in a senior role in a country that is not your home country for the business. And so, Walmart is based in the U.S., based in Arkansas, and I was so far away. And so really navigating a new company, a much, much bigger scale. The business was actually in a challenged state, and so it was a turnaround situation. And so there was a lot of attention, on the business and on the team. And so there was a lot of pressure and a lot of head scratching moments, I guess I would say I had, trying to understand, the way of working and the way of communicating in a completely new business, different culture, based, in Arkansas, and nobody knew me, really. So I had to really work hard to connect with people, reach out to people in the Walmart world, and try to become known and understood. And ironically, because I was an expat, I had come out of California to Agilent and then moved to Shenzhen with Walmart. It's understandable, but a lot of people thought I was Chinese and they didn't understand my background. So, it just meant that I had to do a lot more outreach and be proactive and travel, to Arkansas to meet people so they would know me. And, and I could learn about the new company's culture and the way to get things done.
Yeah. And like, and then how did you kind of transition to that next role at Walmart? Like part of the Latin America and Mexico, part of Walmart?
Well, the transition was out of China back to the U.S. to California, to be the CFO of the global e-commerce segment. And part of that was overseeing e-commerce around the world, including Brazil, including China again, and then being able to serve on the board of Walmart Mexico during that time. But the round trip, I guess, I made from California to Beijing to Shenzhen back to California with two different companies was, pretty miraculous. But it was good for us as a family, and it was definitely fun to come into a piece of the business that was still quite nascent and small and fledgling for a very, very big company. And when I came into that role, our new CEO said, we need to really get serious about e-commerce. So again, I found myself in a place where I was in a really big company, but I was on, I don't want to call it the fringe, but kind of. I mean, it was, not the core. And it's kind of a place that I like to be, because again, I like to be a change maker and a disruptor from inside, because it takes being courageous and challenging preconceived notions and strategies, but in the context of the culture that you're in, you have to understand context and culture to make that change happen.
Yeah, and can you maybe give us some examples of how you were a change maker in the CFO role of e-commerce at Walmart, and some of the things that you did maybe to get outside of your comfort zone and to bring growth to the e-commerce space, like you were talking about?
Yeah. Well, one of the challenges that I had as the CFO was to get our business to profitability. And part of that was figuring out how we could do that while continuing to grow the business. And it was really a team effort. And prior to this team, the e-commerce business was an extension of stores. So it was same merchandise, but online, not really tapping into the benefits of being online and competing with the likes of Amazon, which was like, infinite assortment. So one of the things that we did during that time was, and it was kind of a struggle internally to launch, to extend the assortment beyond the store, number one. Number two, to launch a third-party marketplace, which is a really big part of Walmart's e-commerce offering now. But then at that moment, it wasn't really embraced. And so we really had to work through the particulars, of becoming a first party and a third party business. And the profitability contribution from being a third party marketplace was pretty awesome, because everything that you sell on your site, your commission or your take rate drops to your profit. So that was, as the CFO, a really good way for us to chart that path to profitability. The other thing that we did was start the online grocery, buy online, pick up in store business. And so it was really starting to blend the strengths of being a brick and mortar retailer with our online business. And this was pre-pandemic that we started this. So by the time the pandemic came, Walmart was in a really good position to serve customers, being, not inside, don't come into the store. You can order your groceries and we'll bring it out to you in your car. You don't even have to get out, of your car, which was pretty critical during that period. But it really helped us cement our strategy as an omni-channel retailer. So those things probably seem very obvious now, but they were very challenging to do internally, and to really get, the e-commerce and the store retail side to work together. And, I think that is one of the things that's really hard to do, is to figure out how to expand, your market and grow when you've already become so big. and to leverage the strengths that you have, but to reimagine how to use those assets like our stores and our parking lot. We created a drive-through area for people who didn't want to come into the store. So I think there was a really big mindset shift through that period of time, which was to really think about our customers as customers with needs that we should meet, versus trying to get people to come into the store and shop in a traditional way if they didn't want to. There are definitely times when people want to come into the store and do a full traditional shop, but sometimes they don't because they don't have the time. They just want convenience. So we really needed to meet them where they wanted to be met.
Yeah. And like, what was maybe your favorite project or favorite initiative at your time at Walmart, if you had to pick like one thing that was fun to work on?
I think it was that buy online, pick up in store business that I just described. And then I think the other thing was also transforming our e-commerce business in China, where we had acquired and then owned our own company, e-commerce company. And then we decided, even as Walmart, we couldn't be an e-commerce player in the same way around the world. And we needed to collaborate with a stronger partner in China. And so we sold that business to JD.com, and we became the offline partner, offline being, physical retail partner to JD being our online partner. And that was a very challenging deal to do. Because we had to buy out our other partners, we had to buy out the founders, and then we sold the business. And we did it in record time. And we really had to assess the risks of doing that deal and getting into a deep partnership with a Chinese company, where even as, a very large US company, we did not control the decisions. So I think that was really, for me, a really, really big accomplishment. Both getting the deal done, but also getting everyone to come along, inside and doing it in record time. So we had a team in China, we had a team in California, we had a team in Bentonville, Arkansas, and we were literally like, someone was up all the time, getting things done and trying to hit the mark. But yeah, that was a really proud moment.
Yeah. And you mentioned kind of like how sometimes like the company was so big that it was hard to like think differently or like make like a new decision. Like, how were you able to think creatively or think innovatively and do something else when you're already so big as it is?
Well, I think you need to rely on trust that has built over time. So a lot of my partners in the business, in the US business, were people that I had worked with in China. And so we knew each other, we trusted each other. We had been through a lot together. So it wasn't, new people sitting across the table. We had sat on the same side of the table at one point. That's number one. The second thing is when you've got, sort of a small voice and a larger voice, it's really hard, to kind of bridge that. And so we let the customer speak, as opposed to arguing amongst ourselves or debating.
Yeah.
We talked to the customers, and we said, how is this going to impact you positively? And how does that affect your view of our company when we offer you this service? And we can argue amongst ourselves, but you really can't argue with the customer.
Yeah.
And so that was extremely powerful. And, I think that was a really big lesson for me that, you may think what's good for the customer, but you really need to ask them. And you really need to listen. And I think that was really what broke through. And then I think the last thing was the understanding of what would happen if we didn't do this. And there were a lot of people at the time that would say that Amazon maybe wasn't as successful as we were in certain ways, but they were very successful in other ways. And when we started to understand that we were on a convergent path, we were going to collide, whether it was for groceries or e-commerce, or they were getting into physical spaces too. We did the analysis and we said, we're both coming at each other, and we need to protect our core business, which is groceries and perishables. Yeah. And I think doing the data analysis, putting the facts on the table, letting the customers speak, have them in the room when you talk about this, and leveraging the goodwill and the trust that you've built amongst your collaborators is really key.
Mm-hmm. And then why did you end up leaving Walmart then to go to Aura as the CEO and CFO? And what was it like being both the CEO and CFO there?
Well, I left Walmart a couple years before I did that. I was out here in California. We had made a big acquisition of a company in e-commerce. And so it was a time for me to move on and to be in California. So I did some board work for a while and then got the itch to get back into a full-time role. Yeah. And the reason why I became the CEO and the CFO of this company was because I had joined right before the pandemic started, March 2nd, 2020.
That's my birthday.
Oh, there you go. An auspicious day. But as you know, that was like a period right before everyone really understood what was happening. Mm-hmm. And the business was very different. It was a fintech business that, offered credit building loans to the underbanked community. And this was, the population that were working in hospitality, gig workers, undocumented workers. And so they were the hardest hit during that early period of the pandemic. So we did some management changes. It is unusual, Ben, to have the CFO be the CEO at the same time. I will say that, and not typical and not suggested, but it was out of necessity. And so I was double hatting and, took the company through several bridge financings until we were able to get to a strategic sale of the company. That was the most, the best outcome that we could have hoped for, during that period of time. And, I learned a lot going from Fortune 1 to a late stage startup that I had to learn a lot about the industry. I had some financial services experience, but in a different way in Walmart. But when you don't have the backstop of a very big company behind you and you don't ever have to worry really about cash, and now you're in a startup situation and you're trying to, continue the business and make payroll, try to sell the business intact. It was a huge education.
Yeah. And then how did you then move along to being the president of consumer at, I don't know how to say it, but like Amyris?
Good try. Amyris, a biotech company here in the Bay. I had met the CEO and the team a couple years before, and we stayed in touch, and through the pandemic we continued to talk. But I just maintain that relationship, but I was trying to navigate, the current business. And then once that chapter was over, we started talking again, and, we were developing this consumer business, this branded business. And so again, it was an opportunity to start, acquire, and scale consumer brands inside the context of a biotech company, where the biotech company created the ingredients that we used for the products, the health and beauty, health and wellness products. And I was in charge in the beginning of the brands that were going into food retailers, mass and drug retailers, which was my background from Walmart. So that was a natural transition, but being being the general manager of across a number of brands and also running a number of the corporate services to support everybody, like the digital, team who did all of the D2C websites. That was also a really great experience, jumping into a non-financial leadership role.
And like, what did you like about it? I guess like differently from like that not financial side of like what you had done in the past and kind of like a different role.
What I really loved about it is that you're really focused on, you're really responsible for the entire P&L, like truly, and you're responsible for strategy and growth. And scaling. And you really need to set strategy and bring the right people on at the right time with the right skills to help you achieve that. And so it kind of brought me back to my early days in strategy, but now I was responsible for execution and building out the teams and doing it very quickly. There was not a lot of time to waste. But also thinking ahead to, how do we get this brand from launch to 5 million to 10 to 20, and beyond, and really scale it in the most efficient way. So it kind of brought together my financial background, my strategy background, and my entrepreneurial desire, and working with the different teams and cutting across both internal services and, different businesses in different stages. In any given day, I really enjoy, kind of going very high strategy and then dropping down into the nitty gritty, looking at websites, looking at products, commenting on all of that stuff. I guess it satiates a lot of my curiosity.
Yeah. And now we will move on to the next part of the podcast, talking about your current career and your role now at Sesame Hill Advisors. So how did you join Sesame Hill Advisors as a managing director from your past role?
Well, I had been advising a lot of companies along the way, and more recently, and Sesame Hill is the name of my family's farm when I was growing up. And so it's actually my advisory firm. And so I use this firm to work as an investor in funds, as an angel investor, and also as a part-time operating partner with a early stage and seed stage and Series A, B fund, where I work as an operating partner working with the portfolio company. So it's my firm, and it allows me to do a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of your favorite things that you do with this firm, from like investing or like different advising roles?
Well, I think one of my favorite things is getting, really shoulder to shoulder with entrepreneurs and helping them, think through anything from operational efficiencies to talent. Somebody needs a UX, UI, engineer or CTO or head of sales. Am I ready to hire a chief financial officer or not? What kind of systems should I put in place? When do I start fundraising? I mean, all of these questions that young companies, particularly women-founded companies, women have challenges getting funded in the venture capital industry. So really helping them get prepared for, their business growth, how to think through go-to-market, and just working with founders in any way that would be helpful to them. And sometimes it's just being a sounding board. I think being a CEO and a leader can be a very lonely place sometimes. I mean, you don't want to lay on your team always, how stressed you are, or, the doubts that you might have. And
Yeah.
so, sometimes just being someone who is outside of the team, the day to day, and being a person you can talk to, just for some moral support is also very rewarding.
Yeah. And as you see many entrepreneurs and like startups and like CEOs, what are some like characteristics or traits that you think really help in that space or maybe lead to their success down the line?
I mean, resilience for sure. It's hard. You're going to get a lot of no's before you get a yes. Courage, and, really having the conviction, unfailing conviction around your idea, being very data driven, so not being convinced because it's something that you like, that it's, something that you should pursue. So really ensuring that there's a market out there, and, product market fit for what you're trying to offer, and understanding the competition. So it's really, strategy, deep analytics, being someone that can scale a business and create followership. And because there's talent out there, and the really critical talent, they have many, many options. And so you have to be someone that someone wants to come and work for and be a part of your company as opposed to somebody else's. So it's a lot to do as an entrepreneur, but I think being courageous, being resilient, having conviction, is, and I look for, people with high integrity, for me personally. So those are the few aspects that I think are really, very, 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 very critical. One company that we have invested in through the venture fund is a company called Co-Fertility that I think is very exciting, and is basically a way for women to share their donation, their eggs, by freezing some of their eggs for themselves for the future. So if you're on the younger side and you're not ready to have a baby just yet, but you think you might in the future, when your fertility is very robust. But in order to do that, you need to offset the costs of freezing those eggs. And so, the mission there is that if you're willing to do that and share half of your egg retrieval with intended parents who may not have those options and access, so that they can also have children and families, it's kind of a win-win. And so this company is, I think, very innovative, again, meeting a market need, because, I'm one of those people that was so focused on my career in my 20s and my early 30s, I didn't even want to think about it. And, ironically, I guess, that's when your fertility is at the highest. And so there's a little bit of a mismatch. And so keeping that optionality for both mothers and, future mothers, as well as other families and intended parents, is why they exist. So I think that's an example of an innovation and meeting a real market need. But, it's challenging.
Yeah. And as we move on to the next part of the podcast, being an Asian American in leadership roles comes with its own sets of challenges. What were some of the obstacles you may have faced in your industry, particularly due to your background, if you have faced any?
Sure. Oh, there were lots of challenges, but I think I tried earlier in my career to not identify with being Asian and just try to be like everybody else, despite having the wrapper, so to speak. And I'm a woman, I'm petite, I'm Asian. And so, I wasn't really being my true self. And So I think later on, I realized, there's advantages to being the only one, or being someone that people assume a lot about that isn't really true. And so there's an element of delight and surprise, if you will, because people assume, oh, I actually had one of my friends say to me, "Oh, I thought you'd have a much squeakier voice, higher and squeakier voice based on your looks." But just letting that unfold and having the confidence that you don't have to be somebody else, but you also don't have to buy into that expectation. But you do need to let your voice be heard. And I think that was one of the things. I don't know if it's Asian, Ben, but it certainly was my personality, where I tended to be more of an observer, in a situation.
Yeah.
And I think when you're in a team, or, when I was at McKinsey or in other senior roles, not being heard, not saying something, not establishing your voice early was a mistake. And it's something that I learned to do. I learned to do that at business school, which is why I chose HBS, because that would be a forcing function. But it's just, if you don't manage that and you don't establish your own voice, there will be expectations, and they may be right or wrong. They're probably going to be wrong. And then you have to work against that. And so, I think that was one of the things that, obviously being, a woman, Asian, not many of us sitting at the table in senior positions. And but addressing that with my own take on things, and being sometimes irreverent, using humor is not what people expect, really. And so it's sort of like, whoa, did she just say that? I mean, within the lines, but it just reveals, like, okay, you're not who people, just think you are. There's a lot more to you.
Yeah. And like on kind of the flip side, like what role has your cultural background played in like shaping your leadership style and perspective as a business leader, and how have you found ways to use it as like a strength in your career?
Well, every aspect has a light and dark side. So I just talked about observing. It may be observing, and being a little bit more quiet, but I think that leads to listening, and really observing, listening, and figuring out the context and understanding people. And I think that's always been a key, whether it's been in negotiations or building teams, and, bringing back something about someone that they brought up, years ago. And you remember things about people, about their families, about their background, what they like to do. Not because you're being, strategic, but because you really care and you listen and you want to know about people. And I think that's, like I said, a part of, I think, the culture, the Asian culture, where you sort of talk less and listen more and observe. And, because a lot of things are not said, but you can understand what's going on because you listen to what's being said, body language, who's sitting next to whom, what's not being said, and you take all of that in and process it, and it helps you navigate. And I think China really helped me hone that skill. And then as I became more senior and more confident and comfortable in my own skin, I realized that was a real superpower in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as we move on to the fifth and final part of the podcast, talking about advice and inspiration, the first question is, what do you think makes someone a great leader?
Someone who can set strategy and communicate that with clarity and simplicity and with consistency. And a leader who is, role modeling, asking people to do not only what they want them to do, but what they're willing to do at least themselves. Courage and conviction. And I think when you're following someone into a very difficult space or situation, you want to make sure that you want to feel like that leader has your back as well. Yeah. And so I think that creates, very strong bond, a lot of trust, a lot of followership. But, I always used to say to my CEOs, you just have to repeat yourself over and over and over again. And when you're sick of hearing yourself say the same thing over and over and over again, it's probably now sinking in, right? With everybody, because you're just, wherever you go, you're just being, you're saying like the same things, you're saying it with simplicity, but consistency. And then people start to really hear it and absorb it. And then they'll be able to carry the message forward. But if you say it one time, it just might go over people's heads, or they just don't quite absorb it or understand it. But if you just stay on point, that's really important, especially during times of crisis, which these days seems like every day. But you really just need to be a very, very clear communicator and show your team that you are part of the team and you have their back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like mentorship can play a huge role in one's success. Did you have any key mentors during your career? And if so, what was some of the best advice they gave to you that had a significant impact on you and maybe like the trajectory of your career?
Yeah, I've had some really great mentors. And I'd say that every person that you work with, whether in the moment you perceive them as a mentor or you get along, you can learn from every person. But I would say that, a mantra that has really stayed with me is something that a CEO that I used to work with in China said: do only what only you can do. And at first I was like, what does that mean? And then, I realized that, and I think it's something that people at all points in their career can really think about, is don't do what everyone else is doing unless it's something that you really want to do and you think you are well positioned to do that. But I admit, I was in my early career, I was building the resume, trying to work at all the places and go to all the schools. And, I don't regret those decisions, but you have to think about, like, what is it that you can uniquely contribute to? What really makes you curious? What do you love to do? Because chances are, if you do that, you'll be very good at it. And you'll not be like everybody else. Yeah. And so how you spend your time, what you spend time on, it's a question that I ask myself, is like, is this something that only I can do or I should do, versus it's just something that I'm doing because time is really your most precious. Your time and your reputation is really your two most precious assets.
Yeah. And how do you now define success, and how has that definition changed since the beginning of your career?
Well, in your early career, you don't really get a choice very often who and what you work on. And so for me these days, success is having a big impact on people, serving others and helping them grow their business, grow as leaders, And being able to work with people that I respect, but really enjoy and want to be around. That to me is the marker of success, because it makes me happy. And, you know, it's not easy. Nothing's easy that's, you know, worth doing, I think, but it's enjoyable and it's fun.
Yeah. Yeah. And you like mentioned like reputation and time as like some of the most important things. Can you maybe like explain a little bit more about like reputation and like the importance of that in your work?
Yeah, I think in this era of, you know, information, you know, your relationships, it's very fluid. And so building and maintaining relationships, being willing to help, you know, others, even people that you don't know, because you just don't know how it's going to come around again. And so that's one of the reasons why, you know, when you reached out to me, Ben, you know, and I understood what you were doing, I thought, you know, this is a really great service that you're providing to others. And so I think that it's the big things and the little things that help build reputations over time. And being humble, staying humble, which, you know, I've had some life lessons for sure, but, you know, I think that's part of it is just asking, like, how can I help? How can I serve? I think that's how you build a reputation over time. It doesn't mean always agreeing and saying yes, but, you know, if you can't help in a certain way, like, what is another way you can?
Yeah. And for the last question, if you could leave listeners with one takeaway about building a meaningful and impactful career, what would that be?
Keep learning and follow your curiosity, and always do the best job that you can, because people will remember that.
All right. Well, thank you so much again for being on the podcast. Love talking to you about like your journey at Walmart, and then now like what you are doing now with advising and investing with startups. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thanks, Ben.